Welcome to Autogefühl. I'm Brian. Today, a very special behind-the-scenes look at the brand new BMW M2. Well, we've been waiting a long time for this. This is BMW's most scrappy street fighter. And if you're wondering exactly what that means, this is their most tracked car of every car they produce. They tell me that 1 in 5 of these that they sell ends up on a track. So clearly this is not all about appearance, this car has to perform well as well. Now, long-time viewers will know exactly how I feel about this car. So I'm more than a little bit excited, and as is always the case, I'm a bit nervous about what they do when they tell you it's a complete redesign. The first impression is going to be important in this car. And the 2 words that really hit me about what they've done with the front end of this thing are Tron and Transformers. This is really blocky 80s graphic style. This is maybe the last one of these street fighters they'll be able to produce because, of course, everything goes electric. Here we're cramming in an inline 6-cylinder engine, still absolutely beautiful internal combustion engine technology. This is really all about the driving experience, and clearly the aesthetic needs to mirror that. So for me, there's a huge amount of callback here in the front about those 80s muscle cars, but in a very modern way. I love these huge square air intakes. It's so aggressive, but so low to the ground. It gives such a powerful appearance. Now, in other 2 Series models, you may know that you have adaptive air intakes across the front. They've done away with that nonsense for the M2. They simply don't need it. There is so much air being driven through this engine by these enhanced air intakes. There's no need of any adaptability whatsoever. The assumption with the design of this car is you're already going to be driving this at the maximum speed you're legally allowed to when you're off track and really pushing it when you're on. So the most airflow they can get through to that engine, the happier they are. Now look at the way that design language comes up through here. You'll be familiar with this new BMW light signature that comes into the front headlights, but the way it works in contrast with this black front on the front of the new M2 is particularly dynamic. Slightly higher up, as you come up the visual line of the car, the most impressive thing that strikes you is the contrast from this new carbon roof right through down into the bonnet. Now, the reason that that's taken place is apparently there were 2 main complaints that standard M2 customers had with the last issue. The first was the door mirrors. Well, we'll take a look at those when we get round the side. And the second was no carbon roof option available. So the carbon roof is not a cheap option. That's going to add at least $3,000 to your cost of car. But look at the way that contrast works from the top to the front. I started off by saying this may very well be the last such car you're going to be able to buy. So it just might be worth it. 4 meters 57 or 180 inches. The wheelbase on the new M2 is actually 5.4 centimeters longer than the predecessor. That's about this. And that's part of what helps to give this car such an aggressive stance. Not only that, I don't know if the keen-eyed amongst you have spotted, but the front wheels are actually 1 inch smaller than the rear wheels. So 19 inches on the front and 20 on the rear. Now, a lot of that is to do with the fact that any M2 fan is going to be able to tell you it's got to be rear-wheel drive, right? So that's the only way you can get this car, rear-wheel drive. Now, BMW have this big thing about 50-50 weight distribution. Well, they say 50-50. This one's actually 48 in the rear and 52 in the front. That, of course, is the engine, so you're still going to have a little bit of a bias. But what you do get is a really refined, precise position on the road, and I'm hoping that that is even more pronounced in this longer wheelbase car than it was in the predecessor, which, by the way, was an excellent drive. Now, I think it was a really good feature to make sure that this time the M series rear view mirrors were included right from the get-go. That's such an important signature feature of the entire way that the side of this car presents. Nice to see it. Now, you'll be aware with the styling details on other cars within the 2 Series that there's a lot more carbon effect, a lot more detail. That's very showy. It's nice for customers to have that choice, but I like that they've resisted that temptation here. If you look, for example, low down at this door sill as it runs the length, it's uncomplicated, unfussy, and everything about the side presentation of this car just says, I'm here for business, which is what I like. Now these larger wheels that are 1 inch larger both in front and rear than they are on the standard 2 Series come at a cost of a slight addition of weight. So as you can imagine, when you factor that in and the increased size of the engine, you're going to be looking at a slightly higher weight number. So they have worked right throughout the car at reducing that rate elsewhere. So if you do go with the carbon roof, for example, and in a little minute we're going to take a look at those carbon seats that are optional extras, you can help bring that weight right down. So the total curbside weight of this car, 1,700 kilograms. I don't think that they've wasted any of that where it doesn't need to be used. What do you think? This color, in case you're wondering, is Toronto red, and you might recognize this from existing M3 and M4 models. I think it particularly works for the M2 because, again, of that dynamic contrast between the black and the nice matte red finish. So that's what I like. I don't know about the rear of this car. Now, what BMW have said is that this spoiler across the back is essential for aerodynamic performance. I'm sure it helps, but if you visually remove this aesthetic, you can see how the bottom looks a little bit thin here, especially with such a huge, bold statement right at the base of the car. Now, that clearly has been done to make this look extremely aggressive, and who can't fail to be a fan of these massive M-style exhaust pipes in the back of this diffuser at the rear? Well, again, that's all for aerodynamic performance, but to me it leaves a little bit of a contrast which hasn't quite been resolved. Massive, dynamic, bold statement at the bottom, a little bit lacking visually at the top. That said, these rear lights really do help with that dynamic by pulling the focus away from what I think is a slightly weaker top section. So whether or not you think that it's necessary for your aerodynamics to have these statements, it certainly does lend itself to a very distinctive rear. Now, I'll tell you what I'm interested in. This, to me, really is evocative of earlier generations of Alfa Romeo. Am I crazy there, or do you get that feeling as well? Let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. What you're looking at is a 3-litre 6-cylinder inline engine producing 460 horsepower or 550 newton meters of torque. Paired with this engine, you can either go with a manual or automatic gearbox. That's an 8-speed Steptronic automatic gearbox, which is going to propel you from 0 to 100 in 4.1 seconds, or the manual, which is going to take 4.3. Come on, you don't want an automatic gearbox with this car, surely. Here you can see the key. It's a pretty light affair. You've always got to make the choice as to whether you want these things to be really solid feeling and heavy in your pocket, or light and easy to carry around. I think I'm going to go with the light because at the end of the day, it does have to sit in my pocket. Now, the door handle, as soon as you touch it, does feel a little bit on the plastic side, but as you pull it up, it's got a nice, solid, reassuring feel to it. And given that these doors are frameless, again, they have a nice, solid feel to them, and the noise that they make is quite rewarding. As you open the car up, the very first thing that strikes you, of course, is these big bucket seats. Now, they're carbon fiber, and they're only available in a leather finish. The designers tell us that's because they simply can't get the same effect of the heating and cooling using synthetic materials. Honestly, I don't know if I believe that. There are many other options available right now, but if you want these bucket seats, they're going to run you between 3,000 and 4,000 extra on top of your list, and you're not going to be able to get them in any other finish. I don't know. I've never found bucket seats to be the most comfortable thing in the world. The defining feature is, are you taking this car on the track or not? Well, 20% of people who buy this car will be tracking it. And if you're one of those guys, I think to get the best out of the driving experience, you are looking at these seats. For everyone else, if you're not taking this on the track, really, the Sensor Tech finish is great. Check it out before you make a decision. Now, I already said big on 80s styling. Take a look in this door. What you can see here is a pixelated, backlit color finish. Again, it just reinforces the 80s styling of the design of this vehicle. For me, that's no bad thing. I sort of wonder if the designers at BMW are as carried away with Stranger Things as the rest of the planet is right now. I don't know. For me, it's an evocative callback to the muscle cars of old that had literally no safety features whatsoever. So nice contrast between the modern, that being all the new tech, and the real power era, that being the car itself. Does all of that tie into a comfortable experience? Because anyone who's ever sat in a Lamborghini Countach will tell you it may have looked fantastic on the road, but driving it was no laughing matter. Well, things have moved on a little bit since then. So these bucket seats are actually pretty comfortable. I am 5 feet 10 or 178 centimeters in height. I have a long torso though, and as you can see, I have acres of room in the head. Now, a lot of that is going to be this carbon fiber roof taking up a lot less space up here. The car feels very powerful from this sitting position. Let me see if I can adjust the seat. Now, that very nicely illustrates gripe number one. If I'm in a car that is purely designed for performance, I really don't need everything to be electric. One, it takes so much longer than just having the manual catch points. But two, it's adding extra weight that I don't want in the car. So this is an interesting compromise of design in a performance vehicle. Is it necessary? To me, not so much, but I guess their feedback must tell them the customers like it, otherwise why would you fit it to the car? When you're making your seat selection for this car, it is worth considering the carbon footprint. I feel a bit silly saying that about a performance car, but still, 85% less is how much you will achieve if you go with a synthetic fabric for your finish and not with leather. I think that's worth considering. If you want to see the details on that, you can get them through BMW's website. If there's one thing bothering me about the initial presentation, it's this. And this is the thing that BMW are most proud of the interior. This is a 12.3-inch driver display and a 14.9-inch infotainment system display. Why does it bother me? Well, I guess the first thing would be the new BMW ID8 operating system. The positive is that it is very fast and responsive compared with earlier. The second is, my goodness, just look at all of this. I think it's going to take more than a little bit of time for you to figure out how on earth to navigate around all of this. I like giving people options. That's great. But this is a full-blown laptop baked into my car. And this is where I have the challenge. What I love about this car is the immediacy of its performance. Now that's demonstrated here with this gearbox. This is a manual 6-speed gearbox, and the designers tell me they had to fight to keep this in the car. Why? Well, because obviously the automatic is not only more efficient, but it's also faster. You can't drive this any quicker than the automatic gearbox will already carry you. But that doesn't speak to the emotion of this car. And that, I think, is the problem I have with the new technology and the way that it's been baked in. I would suggest that the vast majority of people who buy this car couldn't care less about this. This is the first time that the M2 has only come with adaptive suspension, for example. 3 different settings. Previously, it was just standard suspension. Now that clearly made it a somewhat less comfortable, more challenging drive. But that was the point. So am I just being a whingy old man? I guess this is my position. If this is the last one of these I'm going to be able to buy, because in future everything's electric, and then sure, I'll expect all of this. Was it too much to ask that for the last one I couldn't have those big meaty analog dials that I and so many other people love so much? Maybe I'm just a dinosaur. I'm sure all of this tech works brilliantly and gives you so many more everyday usage features that are helpful while you're driving around in this car. But you know what? Nobody ever fitted a carbon fiber bucket seat into a car that was there for doing a supermarket trip. You know what I mean? Really, this car is all about the drive. And I won't find out exactly how much this affects me until I have the chance to take this out on a track. And thank you, BMW, for paying some attention to that at least. It's the first one with an available head-up display, but brilliantly, you can switch this off when you're in track mode. So that's great. Now, I don't want to challenge this too much. I'm sure that new adaptive suspension is going to drive great. I'm sure it's going to make me feel more comfortable and more secure in the car. It's bigger, it's more powerful, it's got a wider stance. It's even got an increased camber on the wheels to give it more road holding. This car is going to be a beast. I just don't want it to be too easy to drive. What always set me on fire about the M2, in particular the M2 competition, was that feeling that there was just a little edge that was a little ragged. That's what I love about that car. So I'm desperately hoping with all this new digital refinement and all these new options, that hasn't got lost in the mix. What gives me hope? This does, the manual gearbox. Thank you, BMW, for preserving this. Well, we can't really see what the displays offer without our first opportunity to hear what the car sounds like by starting it. So let's see in the cabin what that inline six-cylinder sounds like. That's nice. Oh, bad owner, service overdue. So let's see what adaptability this screen gives us that is different from the analog dials. If I hit the menu button, you can see that you can change that central display to demonstrate anything that you want to know while you're driving. Now that's only the options that are available to you through the steering wheel while you're using the car. If you want to dig in deeper and change the display itself, that should be available to us through the operating system. I very much like how responsive these controls are, and we can change the display mode. Let's change it to track and see what that does. Okay, if Michelle pans back to the driver's display, you can see that gives us less clutter on the screen, and we also have the opportunity, I think, to configure our road system so we can put in all kinds of different information and make it available to us to display exactly where we want, exactly what we want to see. Interesting to note, in deference to the older guys like me, there's still a manual volume knob for your infotainment system, but unsurprisingly, no manual climate controls. Those are all through the screen here. And as you might be able to tell, they are very definitely not the most intuitive things to use in the world, but there are some buttons to access some of the central features down here. This button on the right-hand side is for fans on off. It's not on right now. The climate controls are switched off, but they do feel more than a little plasticky when you push them, and they do not separate themselves in an obvious enough way to make it super easy to pick them and control them when you're having fun cornering at speed. Carbon fiber and light detailing continue right throughout the cockpit and really helped again to accent that sort of sports / 80s vibe that you get from the rest of the car. In the central cockpit here, you know, this is an interesting feature. I've never liked the way that these BMW gearboxes look, but it's only when you actually start using them that you lose all interest in concerning yourself with that. It's such a nicely put together piece of equipment. Center console here is very unfussy. I like that they've hidden the storage away where you don't need to look at it all the time. Cup holders, that perennial love-hate thing in all cars, has been kept well out of the way so you can pretend to your passenger that they don't exist at all. USB charge point, but also inductive charging for a phone down here, and a nice feature of an additional 12-volt charge point for anything else. All can be kept well out of the way, hidden underneath that useful flap. Back here, further standard BMW controls for the infotainment system if you prefer accessing them in that way. Decent bit of storage in the middle, a nice inductive charging pad for a mobile phone there. More charge points. Really happy to see that they've put more than enough of those in. There are two nice features you get with a bucket seat. The first is the weight loss, and the second, mostly I don't have to have that irritating wait for the electrics to catch up with the fact that I want to sit in the rear. Well, you may well say, who on earth is ever sitting in the rear of this car? I'll tell you who. Somebody with extremely short legs but a long torso. Let's find out if it's doable. Well, you may have seen Thomas do this in his review. He's just too big. We need to do something to make his legs a little shorter. Look at this. I have palatial space back here. Okay, that's a bit of an overstatement. But you know what? There actually is plenty of room. Yes, I have very short legs. Yes, this driver's seat is set for me. But I do have a long torso, and although I'm pretty compact back here, I have enough space to make myself comfortable. So who cares? The long and the short of it is, if you want to put kids back here, there's ample room. And if you want to fit normal sized people back here for a short trip, they're going to be plenty comfortable. Thomas is a tall guy, so okay, I get you wouldn't want to fit a 6'3" person in the rear of one of these cars, but for a normal human being, sorry to offend tall people out there, it's more than comfortable. This car has the optional leather in the back. You don't need that. You can get the Alcantara and the SensorTech I think it actually might be more comfortable. This is a very dynamic driving car, and needless to say, if you're in the front, those bucket seats are not going to tell you what's happening to your passengers in the rear who are going to roll around in these seats because there really is no position holding at all. So, rear seats, very much an afterthought. Who cares? If anyone's sitting back here, the only thing they should be thinking is, maybe I need to work a bit harder so I can be sitting in the front of this car instead of in the back. Back on those rear seat passengers again, if you're asking yourself, can I really get away with convincing my partner that our two brand new precious bundles of joy are safe in the back of this thing? Don't worry, there is Isofix. So if that's your reason for worrying about whether you're going to be allowed to buy one of these things, carry on. We're going to take a look in the back, and Thomas has given me my very own measuring stick so I can show you what's going on back there. Well, I don't know how bothered a standard customer is going to be about what they can fit in the back of one of these while they're racing around the track, but that is 390 litres of load space you're looking at, which I think is hugely impressive for this car. Now, to give you a sense of scale, if you have a look at this, it's a standard carry-on flight case. So you have more than enough room. In depth, that's 37 inches or 95 centimetres, well, give or take. 90 centimetres, I think, is a bit more accurate. And for the width, you're looking at 98 centimetres or almost a metre. Thomas, I know you're going to be tutting while you're looking at this like, Brian, this is not how you use the stick. I'll get better, guys. It's my first time. Okay. And then for inches, for width, around about 38 to 40. So plenty of load space, but we're not all done there. If I pull this catch down here, you can see that the seats, well, in an ideal world, they just drop down, but I'll give it a little bit of encouragement from the inside. And there you can see the extra load space. So if you watch Thomas's review of the 240i, you will see that he thinks you can't fold the seats down fully. Again, he's got really long legs, and that's why they won't fold down. If you have reasonable person-sized legs, no problem at all. Come on, Thomas, find something to do about that. Speaking of the 240i, why don't you go ahead and watch that right now?